Hello internets, Rick here, and recently I've been exploring some of the dilemmas of time travel, like morality and paradoxes, and wanted to make a discussion critique video about it. But before we jump into that, I want to give a quick shout out to a charity compilation of stories about Sarah Jane Smith from the Doctor Who universe. If you'd like to hear more about that, stay for the end of the video, but without further ado, let's get into the discussion. Numerous sci-fi universes tackle the notions of time travel and the repercussions of it. Star Trek, Doctor Who, and even Star Wars have investigated the ideas behind paradoxes, changing history, and even alternate timelines. Well, not so much Star Wars, which, if we take the events of Star Wars Rebels at face value, they seem to suggest that time is mostly immutable and events will unfold as determined every time. So the bulk of this video will be centred around the Trek and Who universes. When time travel becomes achievable, it raises a series of questions that can be difficult to answer. Questions like, how far can we go to alter events? Should they be altered at all? And what are the repercussions? Are paradoxes unavoidable, and are you able to retain knowledge of timelines prior to the one you're currently experiencing? For clarification, one of the most well-known effects is called the grandfather paradox, where a time traveller goes back and eliminates their own grandfather before they have any children. This means that there is no longer any progenitor of the time traveller, so they never could have existed. But if they didn't exist, then they would never have been able to go back in time to kill their grandfather. And we are left with a circular loop of the two events cancelling each other out. Another idea is the causal loop, where information about a known event is sent back in time, and that very knowledge leads to the event unfolding. You receive a message from yourself in the future saying you've run out of Lucky Charms, so you go to the shops and buy a box, and then send a message back to yourself telling your past self to go buy some Lucky Charms. If you never received that message, would you have gone to the shops to buy some, given it's not even your favourite cereal? Did you only go because future you said you had to? And this escalates even further if we involve an actual physical item. Picture this: you're sat at home when suddenly you appear to yourself and hand over a box of Lucky Charms. You say do not open them, and a year from now you have to travel back to now and give yourself the box. A year later you have that unopened box and you travel back in time a year ago and hand your past self the cereal, repeating exactly what you said back then. The loop is complete. But where did the box of Lucky Charms come from in the first place? You didn't buy it, you received it from future you. And future you didn't buy it, they got it in the past from their future you. Both Trek and Doctor Who address these issues and generally paint paradoxes as something to try to avoid, but when they do occur, trying to correct them can be a mess, and sometimes it's best to just let them play out. In Doctor Who, the Time Lords were the Gallifreyans who presided over the laws of time and instituted order and rules on traversing the fourth dimension. Time travel was accomplished by entering the time vortex, the dimensional intersection of space and time, usually in a TARDIS, and most time travel in the Whoniverse ties into this vortex at some point. Being inside of the vortex, you are effectively outside of space-time and therefore exempt from the changes being made to time, allowing an observer to witness alterations. In earlier periods of Time Lord history, they took a far more active role in the enforcing of their eventual rule over time by preventing threats from unfolding before they happened, and clashing with several other races for control. Once their unparalleled understanding of time was achieved, they became more passive in their oversight, taking it upon themselves to police all of history. Such duties mostly centred on observation of the timelines for unnecessary or irresponsible alterations and correcting them. They also facilitated travel to different dimensions and parallel worlds, some of which were likely caused by alterations to history. They had very good reasons for their strictness, however, as alongside the complexities that paradoxes form, there were threats such as the Reapers that would descend into such events and purge them of all life. Alongside this were cosmic balances created by entities even beyond the Time Lords in scope and powers, such as the Chronivores, beings that embodied entropy and ate away at time, the sixfold gods known as the Guardians, and the Eternals. Beings like this were so woven into the fabric of reality that they were practically forces of nature, and while the Time Lords had knowledge and even a few interactions with them, their efforts were often limited to maintaining the cosmic status quo. Basically, the Time Lords had a greater understanding of time and space than most other species, including its threats and balance, so took up the mantle to protect less advanced time travellers from themselves. A not insubstantial amount of factions took umbrage with the Time Lords for their single-handed regulation of time travel. This led to a great deal of scheming and an eventual time war. Switching to the Star Trek universe now, time travel has long been a known factor of space exploration, usually caused by unexpected events involving the manipulation of the space-time continuum. Starfleet records began to suggest that time travel has always been a part of even humanity's history, with the Silicon Age being accelerated by the crash of the timeship Aeon in 1967, and events such as the Bell riots are altered by the unintended influence of displaced time travellers. I've done a video exploring the different institutions throughout Trek's lore responsible for protecting the timelines, linked here for a more in-depth breakdown. Suffice to say, it wasn't long before Starfleet agreed on a set of rules to govern time travel to prevent unintended consequences, most around the notion of non-interference, paralleling the Time Lords. By the 29th century, Starfleet had an active branch dedicated just to maintaining continuity, but this itself raises a question. Where were they all these times where time travel was running amok? We see efforts in Star Trek Enterprise from the 31st century equivalent of Time Cops to limit damage from factions engaged in a temporal Cold War, where vying factions were trying to rewrite history to their favour. There are many other instances that could have used their attention too. So why did they not interfere? In fact, let's go one step further. If they knew of huge tragedies that were to occur, why did they not go back to prevent them? Let's look at a hypothetical. A bridge collapses and many lives are lost. An investigation reveals that it was down to a defect in its construction, one that was completely unforeseen. This leads to new regulations and checks that rewrite construction methods and create a whole new slew of techniques. As a time traveller, you could go back and prevent that from happening, save those lives. In order to maintain your cover and prevent a whole other host of problems, you'd have to do this stealthily, without revealing foreknowledge. So, you alter the construction plans to remedy the fatal flaw. Congratulations, you've saved lives. The bridge never collapses, and the designer is hailed for his ingenuity in bridge design, so they are commissioned to make a dozen more, all over the country. Only the original flaw he made was never discovered, and those regulations that prevented this same accident from occurring weren't written. Now there's a dozen bridge accidents waiting to happen, and history is looking far more unstable. So you try again. This time you go back, and without revealing your origin, point out to the engineer directly the potential problem. They change the design. But now, as the accident never occurs, these regulations are not put into place with the same urgency, and the pioneering techniques that led from them are not implemented for years to come. Better, but still not that perfect outcome. This is a fairly contained example of the butterfly effect one alteration could have. With every change made, the number of variables increases, and how much effort would you have to put in to get the desired outcome of saving lives while maintaining development? You could curate the whole event from planning to completion, and then initiate a perfect outcome that preserves the technological development of bridge construction. But if you've usurped control of the whole project from the shadows, then you've interfered with the lives of everyone involved by it, made the choice for them, and effectively become the manifestation of fate. You're replacing free will with your own vision of destiny, no matter the moral intent. And what justifies the resources and efforts involved on your end of the escapades when there are wars, plagues and the like that you could be curtailing instead? So then, where does the line get drawn? You're acting as destiny for all these lives, so why not more? This immoral trap is so easy to fall into because it appears to be the moral choice on the surface, and it's best illustrated by the 10th Doctor episode, The Waters of Mars, where the Time Lord succumbs to this line of thinking, having no one to stop him. Now, I'm aware that there are workarounds to my hypothetical scenario, but I hope my point comes across. There are no lessons learned by remedying an event before it happens. The imaginary bridge collapse was a tragedy for sure, but the takeaway from the event led to safer, better changes down the line, and in my fictional scenario, an improvement of technology. You could apply the same logic to wars, accidents and industrial oversights that are indeed terrible, but as a species we can use those opportunities to learn, to grow from them. What right does someone from the future have to alter events like this and thereby destroy any development we may have been able to glean? Providing we are willing to learn, of course. Moral dilemmas such as this are frequent occurrences when addressing what could be and what should be. When you're dealing with changes that affect the course of an entire species, suddenly the opinion of one person, or even a single faction, seems far from ideal. For this reason, it's understandable that an organisation like Doctor Who's Time Lords or Trek's Temporal Agents are very cautious, strict, and regulatory when it comes to making changes, and even remedying situations, sometimes letting a form of temporal interference play out, as the outcome could be deemed the lesser of two evils. Hell, in the case of Star Trek, it's likely that all these incidents of unregulated temporal activity are what led to Starfleet founding the Department of Temporal Investigations in the first place. Time travel episodes often get resolved to a degree, so a sweeping fix of history could very much produce a net outcome on the bad choice side of things. I can't imagine the burden of being able to help, but knowing your actions could ultimately cause more harm than good. I'd hate to be in that position. The nature of time travel in both of these shows ultimately is not set in stone, with events sometimes spawning entire new parallel realities, or sometimes altering the existing timeline which the protagonists find themselves in. And in universe, we can explain it away with arguments of variables in the polarity of the quantum cascade, or the nature of this temporal crisis. An honest answer is that there are many theories and ideas about time travel that are fun to explore, even if they're contradictory or raise a whole host of other questions. Doctor Who in particular pays very little heed to any firm laws, with the only constant being the Doctor's own timeline, which he often lies or forgets about anyway. In the end, at the beginning, time travel is a lot more complicated when you begin to consider what right you have to alter events. So most sci-fi ultimately portrays the right option as preserving history by halting alterations, including preserving those alterations that are documented events set in stone. Doctor Who even introduces the notions of fixed points of time that cannot be altered because of the chaos it can cause. This is how I picture fixed points. If you unravel several balls of yarn and bunch them together, you can pin them to a wall by the most bunched up points. The yarn is time, and the pins represent the points in our time yarn that cannot be removed, or it falls off the wall. Repeated time travel around the same area in our string can create a fixed point too, because this is like tying the yarn in knots as you continually alter events. At some point you'll create a knot that can't be untangled, so you'll just pin that to the wall to keep it there. This is what happens in the Angels Take Manhattan episode, Where there was so much time travel going on from the Doctor and the Weeping Angels in New York 1938, he was unable to return to that time to save his companions. At least that's the visual image that helps me understand why. Rip Amy and Rory. Though at least Amy goes on to guard the galaxy and Rory becomes his own Time Lord and gets a long brown coat in other shows. So I guess it all worked out in the end. I hate temporal mechanics and wibbly wobbly indeed. What paradoxes are you aware of, and how would you address my hypothetical bridge problem whilst maintaining cover? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for taking the time to watch this video. So, like I said in the intro, I wanted to highlight a collaboration of authors and their curated works called Defending Earth. The stories included are completely fan fiction, but centred around different times of the life of Sarah Jane Smith, companion to the 3rd, 4th, 10th and 11th Doctor. There's a total of 15 short stories that range from a couple of pages to over 100, beginning with the story The Sparks, set during her childhood, and the tales spin onward from there, and covers some stories interwoven from the time of the Sarah Jane adventures, so it's definitely geared up for fans of the show and character. The book is getting a physical release, but pre-orders for that end April 2nd, but you can pick up the digital version for $4.99. I've included a link in the description to take you to the Defending Earth homepage, as well as links to the Cancer Research Institute website, as the proceeds are going to support the Cancer Research Institute in memory of Elizabeth Sladen, Sarah Jane's actress, who died in 2011 from the disease. If it's something you like the sound of, thank you, but don't feel pressured. The revenue of this video, providing it doesn't get copyrighted, will be going to Cancer Research too, however much that ends up being. So, thanks for taking the time to listen, and thanks for any help you wish to provide. Until next video, I've been Rick, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.